Now, I must tell you right up front, I love turkey. I know you're not the food. I mean, I do like turkey, the food, uh, but I love the country. I love everything, everything about the place. I love the people. I love the culture. I love the history. I love the music. I love the food. I love the atmosphere. I love the food. I love the food. Okay, stopping now. And anyway, nothing makes me more happy than spending my time traveling about this lovely country that is so rich in beauty and wonder. In fact, I've actually spent about, I would say, about a total of 8 months over the years in Turkey doing various things. And I love staying with my Turkish friends, as well as archaeologists in Ephesus. I love taking an afternoon nap amongst the ruins of Nissa. I love wandering the streets of Istanbul and getting lost. I love exploring ancient Lycia and Pamphylia and the rugged cliffs around Termessus. And oh, it's a wonderful place. I love the coast. I love the coastline of Turkey, which is obviously ancient Anatolia, also known by the Greeks and Romans as Asia Minor. Yet, there is this air of mystery each and every time I leave the region bordering the Aegean and the Mediterranean, and I journey into the hinterland, the interior of Anatolia. There is something very strange about central Turkey. It's provocative. There's this energy that I can't quite explain. It's dynamic. And there is so much that happened here in the area of religion. This. Now I got to tell you that the arid highlands of central Anatolia occupy roughly 19% of the total area of modern Turkey. This wide plateau is surrounded by mountains to the west, east, north, and south, and is punctuated by two large basins, the Konya Ovasi and the Tuzgulu, or the Salt Lake District. The largest cities today are Konya, which is ancient Iconium, which I've been to once, and Ankara, which I've been to a few times, and that's, of course, the capital of Turkey. But this was once the direct heart of the ancient Hittite Empire, and it was known as Phrygia and Galatia. This was the mystical center of Anatolia. What's curious is that every single belief system that either crossed or developed here was influenced in some phenomenological manner by this very mystical and ecstatic indigenous culture, whether it be the worship of the ancient goddess Kybele with her consort Attis in the Greco-Roman period, right? Same area was a place of those known as the Montanists. These are Christian prophets during the early Christian era who, again, mystical gifts. And then you have the mystical theology of the three Cappadocians in the 4th century CE. And then, of course, you have a particular brand of Islamic Sufism that was introduced by Rumi in the 13th century. All bear some mark or accent from this land of wide open grasslands and barren rolling hills. As you may have guessed, I will make sure that we talk about how the indigenous beliefs influence Rumi. We will go there. Now, there's hardly a person that hasn't heard of the whirling dervishes. Those dancing mystics in their red or brown hats and white outfits, and they're spinning to the sound of the serene flute, seemingly echoing through vast halls or a deep cavern, right? You often see the whirling dervishes on commercials on TV. You see them on brochures. I mean, they're everywhere. You can't miss it. Many have heard of Rumi, if not specifically, then at least in passing. And maybe you see this in some ways as like a blog or a meme. It's like, oh, Rumi says this, Rumi says that. But let's go into some things that Rumi does talk about. All right. So here we go. Here's a few words of wisdom that arrive from Rumi. Let's see. Okay, here it is. Rumi speaks about love. He says, your task is not to seek for love, but merely to seek and find all the barriers within yourself that you have built against it. I love that. I'll read it one more time. Sorry. Indulge me, please. Your task is not to seek for love. Don't seek for love, but merely to seek and find all the barriers within yourself that you have built against it. So surrender to love. He also says, let yourself be drawn by the stronger pull of that which you truly love. Let love take control. Let love move you. Very often, this love for Rumi is a mystical love. He sees it as a spiritual expression. He says, this is love, to fly toward a secret sky, to cause 100 veils to fall each moment. First, to let go of life, finally, to take a step without feet. Beautiful. Rumi declares the need for tolerance. He says, out beyond ideas of wrongdoing and right doing, there is a field. I'll meet you there. Rumi gives us hope for those in pain. He says, the wound is the place where the light enters you. Rumi encourages us to realize transformations do not occur without some discomfort. He says, if you are irritated by every rub, how will your mirror be published? So if you're irritated by every rub, how will your mirror be polished? Rumi wishes us to be our own individual selves. He says, don't be satisfied with stories, how things have gone with others. Unfold your own myth. I think we all should unfold our own myth. Would you? Right? Be your own person. Have your own imagination. Let creativity stir you and change you and transform you. Right? Rumi reminds us we must act with proper decorum. He says, raise your words, not your voice. It is rain that grows flowers, not thunder. Oh, it is rain that grows flowers, right? Rumi wants us to have good company. He says, set your life on fire. Seek those who fan your flames. Rumi wants us to be humble. Yesterday I was clever, so I wanted to change the world. Today I am wise, so I am changing myself. Rumi addresses the human condition. He says, this being human is a guest house. So being human is a guest house. Every morning is a new arrival. A joy, a depression, a meanness, some momentary awareness comes as an unexpected visitor. Welcome and entertain them all. Treat each guest honorably. The dark thoughts, the shame, the malice, meet them at the door, laughing, and invite them in. Be grateful for whoever comes, because each has been sent as a guide from beyond. Rumi is all about hope. Come, whoever you are, wanderer, worshiper, lover of leaving. It doesn't matter. Ours is not a caravan of despair. Come, even if you have broken your vows 1,000 times. Come yet again. Come. Rumi can be profound. What you seek is seeking you, and also silence is the language of God. All else is a poor translation. Rumi is all about spirituality. He says, my soul is from everywhere. I'm sure of that. And I intend to end up there. And finally, Rumi wishes us to be open, to open ourselves up to a world of wonder. He says, sell your cleverness and buy bewilderment. So, what an amazing individual, right? So you could see, so who was Rumi? Who is spouting off all these wonderful things that we read and various memes that you see on Facebook, or you see on Instagram, or you see on various posters. You see this everywhere. So here we go. So Rumi is known as Mavlani Jalal ad-Din. He lived between 1207 to 1273. Rumi believed that music, poetry, dance, and other forms of mystical expression were actual doorways ready to reveal the threshold of God himself or herself or itself, sometimes calling God beloved, since the deity could not be defined by gender. The key ingredient for this opening up was love. For Rumi, the lover's cause is separate from all other causes, he says. Love is the astrolabe of God's mysteries. So, through these loving expressions, the lover could be brought into harmony with the movements of the mind and body so they could focus on God. As a result, one could journey to the perfect one, to the creator of the cosmos. What is the historical background of this famous Muslim mystic, and what forces shape an individual who so influences many of us? Well, first of all, we must briefly examine the life of his father. Yes, his father has a lot of influence on Rumi. His name is Baha al-Din Balad. Balad was born in 1152 in Khorasan, located near Balkh and Termez, on the modern border of Afghanistan and Tajikistan. Baha al-Din Balad, found employment as a religious scholar, often lecturing on various important topics, including theology. In the morning, he taught open classes to the general public about Islamic law, while in the afternoon, after lunch, he would teach private classes to disciples who really want to get a deep metaphysical education, especially on Gnostic and spiritual topics. Wow. So his dad was an educator. Separate from these two teaching opportunities, Baha al-Din Balad taught special courses on the religious sciences. One of these courses was an exegetical study of the Quran in Arabic. He taught 5 days a week, with his Thursdays and Fridays off to relax and contemplate the mysteries of the universe, right? According to Sapalsar, that's the name of the writer, Balad eventually had as many as 300 disciples and kings and sheikhs that would listen to him. So Rumi's father is famous. He was well known. He was popular. So I mean, there is an example for Rumi to follow, and he did indeed follow it. Well, something happens with his father on May 3rd, 1204. Baha al-Din Balad had the mystical epiphany that is still not fully understood. But as a result, he became a dedicated Sufi mystic after that point, leaving behind his journal, which is sometimes called the Acts of the Gnostics or the Book of Beginnings. Here, Baha al-Din Balad declares, he says, after his epiphany, he says, I obliterated myself, stripping myself of all forms so that I could see God I told myself I would obliterate God and strip God of all forms to see God and attain his blessings more immediately. I chanted God, and my consciousness joined to God, and I saw God in the guise of his godhood and the attributes of perfection. I saw that as regards his essence and attributes, how and why are inadmissible questions. The world of God is something other than this, I reflected, for his realm is not the realm of phenomena and perishability. No, when I see his meta proportional essence and his attributes, I see that forms and modes and dimensions all dangle from his holiness like leaves and blossoms. And I know that God and his attributes are something other than these, which they merely bring into existence, but do not resemble. When my consciousness is busied with God, I move beyond the world of existence and decomposition and have my being not in space or in place, but I wander through the world beyond modality. Wow. I mean, really, wow, what an epiphany. He's transcending space. Well, this is Rumi's dad. Okay, people don't know this, by the way. So I'm hoping you're going to hear lots of stuff you never heard before. But yeah, maybe we should quote Dad. Although Dad's a little long-winded. Maybe you don't want to stay around for Dad's quotes because he does like to talk a little bit longer. Oh, Rumi does too. Baha al-Din Balad believed God was discovered within nature. While not necessarily a pantheist, although you could see he was leaning that way, rather than present God in anthropomorphic form, he describes the deity as a presence and energy that infuses the natural world. In fact, he states, hey, another quote, it is as if bodies, mountains, the lands and heavens, the clouds and rains, winds and waters, the fruits and flesh of animals, all are like a chain linked together. Whereas spirits descend into another world beyond these created things, from beyond these created things, God blows into these created things, inspiring them with spiritual realities and joy and sorrow and grief and humility and wrath, just as one blows into horns and trumpets. Baha al-Din Balad declared that every image of beauty and the sound of music, while existing within the created realm, reflected the spiritual world beyond it. You heard that? This is that. You can see how he's going to influence Rumi, because he says again that image of beauty, sound of music, not the hills are alive, although maybe the hills are alive because we talked about the spirit. Um, but all creations infused by this chain of reality. And so they're all connected together and are all expressions of God. And that's exactly what his son will teach. While the common people could not see beyond the veil, the mystic could see beyond the veil. Unlike many of the Sufi mystics, Valad did not believe in practicing strict asceticism. He believed God made humanity to enjoy the pleasures of the flesh, just like he made humanity to enjoy mystical contemplation. Because of this belief, well, Walad did have, he did have 4 wives. That's the limit that a Muslim can have is 4 wives. He did have 4 wives. Momene Khatum, which is the mother of Rumi, Bibi Alvara, Taka, and of course, Qazai Shara. For example, one day, Baha al-Din Walad was staring into an oven. You won't forget this part of the story. He was staring into an oven and contemplating the mysteries of God as related to fire, when suddenly A dog barked, breaking his concentration. At that very moment, he saw his wife, Bibi, and felt lust for her. And so he believed this was God's timing and that he wanted him to enjoy his wife, stating, "This is incited by God. So why should I have been a cause of torment and distraction? God inspired me with the thought, my business, my incitement." And he goes on, and yeah, he made love to her because God told him. He knew at that moment he's looking at the oven, contemplating fire, and he sees his wife, and well, he's on fire, and that was okay, right? It was completely. Now we know that from 1204 to 1212, Baha al-Din Balad moved to Bakash in Traxwania, identified as the town of Lexicon today, and just near the what's the famous Oxus River of the Greeks. So he's moving. For those living at the time, this region was the border between Persia, which is viewed as civilized, and the steppe region of the Turks, often rugged and dangerous. And here in this area between Persia and the realm of the Turks, Rumi was born in the year 1207. This is where he enters life, Persians on one side, Turks on the other. Okay, so around 1212, the Balad family moved 250 kilometers north to Samarkand, which is today Uzbekistan, to the city of Balkh. And so they were living there for a period of time. And so during this period of time, he got married. Rumi got married to a Gohar Khatun, the daughter of Sharif al-Din Allah in 1224. And Rumi had two sons. This is important. Two sons. Ala ad-Din in 1226 and Sultan Balad the next year. Why is that important? Because Sultan Balad is going to be one of my sources on Rumi. That's right. So his son left records of his dad, and I'll be using those as a primary source. By the way, the older son, Ala al-Din, not exactly the greatest individual. So, oldest son, not so great. We'll find that out in a little bit. The youngest son, yay, right? Okay. For all too long, when discussing Rumi's life in Konya, and now in present-day Turkey, most scholars cast this mystic in the light of the purely Islamic religions, and especially with connected to Persia. I want to say this. I'll be clear about this. Is that well, he's influenced by not just Turkish culture, but when he moved to Konya in the year 1229, that's in the central part of Turkey, he is influenced not, he's actually influenced by Greco-Roman religions and Christianity and even Judaism, because this area had all kinds of people living here. In fact, the story is the Muslim Turks, known as the Seljuks, conquered Konya. And while such assumptions that Rumi operated within the Islamic and Seljuk worldview are not without merit, since Seljuks made Konya into a formidable walled capital commanding a vast network of trade routes linking the Greeks in the west with the Muslims in the east. We must remember that a large portion of the population remained Greek Christian, and furthermore, even pagans still resided in the city that was still very much culturally Anatolian. In fact, everywhere Rumi went in Konya, he encountered Christians, he encountered Jews, he encountered pagans. Konya was a cosmopolitan center of buzz with commercial activity and the exchange of ideas. As a result, the ruling authorities of Konya became very tolerant of other belief systems. So Muslims, Christians, Jews, and pagans freely practiced their respective faiths. We have to remember that, and a lot of people don't know this, that even with the Umayyads and the Abbasids, at times, there's a lot of tolerance for other beliefs and faiths. some of the intolerance that you would see arrives after the time of the Mongols and, of course, after the time of the Crusades. But much of the Muslim world were very inclusive. A good example would be medieval Spain. Rumi was not unaware of the multi-religious environment and even accessed symbols and ideas from these other faiths to clarify and communicate his beliefs. So, so while so that means that he, in a sense, advocated not syncretism, but more of a synthesis. For instance, not all Rumi's imagery of Jesus and Mary are from strictly a Muslim context. In fact, he even uses the New Testament at times. For example, he quotes from Matthew 5:49 and says, when you get one blow on your cheek, go and seek another blow. What does Rostrum do in the battle row with a handful of roses and wild roses? So there you have it. So there's a nice mixture. So I think I'll keep the cap on, right? Even when it comes to the talk, keep the cap on. And now Rumi's various meetings and discussions with individuals arriving from these religious perspectives do not go unrecorded. The Church of the Monastery of Saint Epiphanius, which is a joint pilgrimage destination for both Christians and Muslims, they called this place, which is in Konya, Plato's monastery, since it was professed that the Greek philosopher Plato was buried. He wasn't, but they believed that. And although the old complex was eventually transformed into a mosque, both Christians and Muslims met here until the time it was converted. And that only happened in the 15th century. So Aflaki, who completed his account on Rumi in 1353, recalls, quote, in the monastery called Plato's Monastery, there was a wise monk, very learned and very old. He told me that Rumi once made a retreat of 40 days in the monastery. He asked how. And so I think it's interesting is that Rumi was here in this monastery, Plato's monastery, for 40 days. What is this telling us? Well, it's telling us that, well, that he is at a place that mixes Christianity as well as Greek philosophy. And you could see it a lot in his ideas. Already, the surrounding culture is influencing him. And Rumi also used other locations that had a Christian context at times as well. So there you have it. Now, he also he discusses that, yeah, the confusion of Christian sects in one of his works, and he contrasts Islam, which he describes as a religion of war and glory, with a religion of Jesus, in which is a belief system of caves and mountains. He says where monastic life is desirable. But he says something that's interesting. He says here, quote, he says, the long-winded, superficial talk of the Arabs when they speak of pastures and forsaken remnants of former resting places will remind him of Christians, he will say, who confess before a priest all the sins of 1 year in one deceitful talk. In other words, Rumi saw both Christians as well as Muslims acting with a sense of hypocrisy. Or not. Right? Okay. So, but Rumi's association with Christianity was a little bit more intimate. What I mean by that is that, well, beyond hanging out with Christians and being at a monastery, that's the Christian and Muslim monastery, after his first wife died, he married Kira Khatun, who was a local Christian woman who then converted to Islam for him. So he married in a sense. Now, while Rumi honored Jesus, he also naturally honored Muhammad because he is, after all, a Muslim. So he does make it very clear that Jesus is a prophet, just like Muhammad is a prophet. Okay, but again, that's a perspective, right? But ultimately, while claiming Islam for himself, Rumi found truth in all religious traditions and their shared mystical expressions. His visions did not go unchallenged. One day, a certain Muslim of distinction, known as Quanabi, attempted to set Rumi straight in front of a group of spectators. Quanabi he said to Rumi, he says, "You claim to be at one with 72 religious sects, but the Jews cannot agree with the Christians, and the Christians cannot agree with the Muslims. If they cannot agree with each other, how could you agree with them at all?" To this, Rumi answered, "Yes, you are right. I agree with you too." I gotta love it. You gotta love this guy. Okay. For Rumi, the universe was ultimately one, and the oneness was infused by God. And so the various religions and beliefs were all aspects of one central truth. At one point, he declares, this is a quote, "Mind of the universe, point of view, makes all the difference between the believer, the Zoroastrian, and the Jew." Even Hindus, often condemned by some Muslims because they are not technically mentioned as people of the book in the Quran, could understand the truth according to Rumi. He says, when he puts in the mouth of God, he says, "Hindus praise me in terms of India, and the Sindhis praise me in the terms from Sindh. I am not made pure by their magnificence. It is they who are made pure and precious. We do not look to language or to words. We look inside to find intent and rapture." So he says, before we get all into, you're right, you're wrong, you're wrong. He says, you know what? You got to look to, when it comes to spirituality, you got to look to the heart. That's the most important thing. To Rumi, he says, every prophet, every saint has his path, but as they return to God, all are one. These are quotes from Rumi. By the way, every one of these quotes, if you're interested, I have it documented. This is MI 3086, if you're curious. Ultimately, Rumi asserts many of the believers, but their faith is one in soul, though many are their bodies. And this here is a great quote. You will love it. He adds, "I speak of plural souls in name alone. I speak, of plural souls in name alone. One soul becomes 100 in their frames. Just as God's single sun in heaven shines on earth and lights 100 walls, but all these beams of light return to one if you remove the walls that block the sun. The walls of houses do not stand forever, and believers then will be but one soul." What is he saying? He's saying, all the religions, all these beliefs are like little houses and they're all walled in. And God's light shines from above and permeates every one of them. But he says, ultimately, these walls will all be removed, but the light is the same light that shines through them all. I can't think of any way for Rumi to say that in a better way. This is great stuff, okay? But when we speak of Rumi, we must also speak about Shams. Here we go. Shams. Shams al-Din of Tabriz. Who is he? He's an eccentric mystic responsible for decisively transforming Rumi from a famous and respectable, well-versed doctor of the Sharia law into an ecstatic speaker of the eternal mysteries through music and dance. Discussing his encounter with Shams, Rumi states as follows. So Shams and Rumi, I want to make it very clear. We're going to learn all about Shams because there's no learning about Rumi without learning Shams. There's no learning about Shams without learning Rumi. These two are inseparable. They are the best of friends, and even perhaps more. Okay, so there you have it. So Rumi states, he says of Shams, he says, I was once the country's sober ascetic. I used to teach from the pulpit, but destiny made me into one of thy hand clapping lovers. So Shams made him into a hand clapping lover. He also asserts, my hand always used to hold the Quran, but now it holds love's flagon. My mouth was filled with glorifications, but now it recites only poetry and songs. That's from his D1, 24875 to 76. In another passage, he says, passion for the beloved is Shams in this case, took me away from erudition and reciting the Quran until I became an insane and obsessed as I am. So he's describing himself as insane and obsessed. I had followed the way of the prayer carpet in the mosque with all sincerity and effort. Finally, in one of Rumi's most famous descriptions of his transformation, the mystic states, I was wrong. Then I got cooked. And now I am burnt. Wow. One scholar, Rumi, his name is Nasar, believes that Shams al-Din was a divinely sent spiritual influence, which in a sense exteriorized Rumi's inner contemplative status in the form of poetry and set the ocean of his being into motion, which resulted in vast waves that transformed the history of Persian literature. As you can see, this is an amazing encounter. Now, let's talk. Here we go. For a very long time, people didn't know about Shams. Many revisionists have attempted to claim that Shams was a mere figment of Rumi's imagination, a convention created as a convenient outside catalyst for a spiritual awakening. Of course, those advocating this theory are in the minority, and despite these revisionists, most scholars agree today that Shams was an actual person. Beyond that, for a very long time, scholars had little to work with beyond references from Rumi. While Rumi certainly mentions Shams, the context is usually in a mystical sense rather than in a day-to-day sense. For a long time, another group of scholars advocated Rumi was a mere wandering mystic with no real pedigree or value, perhaps even unlearned. All this changed in the year 1937 when Sultan of Alad's family history was finally published. So that means the history that is as written by the son of Rumi was finally published in 1937. Here was the record of a man, the son of Rumi himself, and personally knew Shams at the time. So here's somebody who knew Shams. Alad describes him as a person of knowledge and learning, an eloquent author. Next, following the publication of Al-Faqah's Acts of the Adepts in 1959, it was able to now provide more information about Shams, again, rewriting the history of this mysterious figure. Yet the biggest revelation was yet to come, for it was soon discovered that Shams wrote down many of his own teachings. These teachings go way back, and these works were discovered in the 1940s, but they weren't translated right away. They showed up in 1970 in Persian. A full edition of Shams' writings did not appear in English until 1990. So that means that basically the majority of sources on Rumi before 1990 are really out of date because we don't have Shams' perspective. We now have Shams' perspective. But even in the next decade, It's a little weak because the information was not thoroughly circulated until we get to the 2000s. So this is kind of new stuff. From all these sources, scholars are now able to know many details about Sham's life, much of it from his own words. Shams was born in 1180 in Tabriz, Persia, under the Seljuks. It was a prosperous time, but then it became turbulent, and there's lots of infighting in the region, and it becomes pretty scary, actually. And then, of course, you have the arrival of the Mongols and people losing their heads. So let's just put it this way: life was got tough when he was growing up. During this turbulent time, Shams was born and raised in a good Muslim home in Tabriz. He had a father who he described as a good man of a generous nature, and according to Aflaki, was so sensitive that he was easily moved to tears of joy or sorrow. So he had a very sensitive dad. Shams says, he says, I fault my mother and father for having coddled me. He says, if the cat knocked over a bowl and broke it, father didn't think ever to hit the cat in front of me and didn't get upset. He would laughingly say, what have you done now? It's just as well. Fate has decreed this, or else something would have happened to you or me or mother. So he's pretty kicked back, cat makes a mess. He's like, oh, well, it happens. Good for him, right? Early on, Shams received mystical visions and was a rather odd child. While Shams' father was sensitive, he was not a true lover of God, according to Shams, in a mystical sense. Shams believed his father could not comprehend how God was also found within nature, and because of this, he decided to keep many of his revelations to himself. Another odd aspect concerning his early years involved his mystical life in connection to eating. Shams states, he says, it was said that at a young age, my appetite would leave me, and I would not eat for 3 or 4 days on account of something which not the people, but God had said. So basically, he would have a mystical experience. And because of that mystical experience, it was so overwhelming, he couldn't eat, not just for that day, for the next 3 or 4 days. He said, Father would say, alas, my son, he says he will eat nothing. I said, but I'm not weak. I said, I'm so strong that if you want, I'll fly out of the window like a bird. Every 4 days, a little lethargy would overtake me for a while and leave. During this time, no morsel of food would go down. What's wrong with you? My father would say. Nothing is wrong with me. Am I crazy? Did I tear anyone's clothes? Did I fall on you? Did I rip up your clothes? I don't know what Sham's whole thing with clothes are, but anyway. Aren't you going to eat? Father said. He says, I'm not eating today. So he does have an eating condition. Um, and father asked, tomorrow, the day after that, you can almost hear the voices, can't you? The arguments going on. Just prior to reaching puberty, he was suddenly unable to eat for about 40 days because of what he believed was his mystical love for God. You may guess this pretty quickly, but Shams was not a very big man. He was very thin in size, and I do know, I'm pretty sure that it affected his development. I'll give you a little head start here. Um, he tried to do manual labor and he'd volunteer for it because he wanted to earn some money. And they took one look at him and his frail frame, and they would say, "No, you can't deal with that." So anyway, eventually Shams and his father grew apart, with Shams saying he felt like a duck egg under an ordinary hen. I gotta use that one. I feel like a duck egg under an ordinary hen. He comments, my father didn't understand me at all. I was a stranger in my own town. My father was a stranger to me, and my heart recoiled from him. I thought he might fall upon me, that he'd speak kindly to me, but I thought he'd beat me and expel me from the house. Well, Sham's father would never do that. Sham's father would often ask him, what's wrong? I know you're not crazy, but I don't understand your ways. So misunderstood, yet Shams was not completely isolated from those who could potentially understand him. For right from that time he was a boy, he encountered a spiritual master. Well, we don't know his name, but we do know he used to pick little Shams up and twirl him around in a dance-like manner. Interesting. Shams said he felt either like a captive bird or bread that was being torn apart. Yet the mystic knew he was not ready yet, so Shams was still described as being raw. Um, so his master said, put him off to the side until he catches fire himself. So this idea of fire and being caught on fire that you hear from Rumi is actually coming from Shams in his background. By adolescence, Shams began to meet many mystics in Tabriz, with one source saying that as many as 70 saints lived in Tabriz at one time. There was a great burial site that was located on the northern edge of the city, known as Malankou, translated as Saints Mountain, believed to have as many as 480 buried Muslim saints. The city of Tabriz was divided into two sections, one called Sorkab and the other called Cherenim. A local legend told how red doves, representing the saints from the first corner, would join the green doves from the other in the middle of the night, and together fly to Mecca, where they circle around the Kaaba, only to return to Tabriz again by the crack of dawn. Rumi was so impressed by what he heard about Tabriz from Shams that he said that those living in the city must be daily breathing the revitalizing love of God because of all the graves of the saints who once exemplified the virtue of the city. And of course, you got these doves bringing positive energy. Shams did love the place. They did want to travel someday together to Tabriz. That was they talked about this, the two of them. Unfortunately, it never happened, but it was a dream to visit the site together. While there were many educated mystics in Tabriz, it is best to describe them as, I don't know, rustic, right? So very rustic. So a lot of them did not know the Quran very well. And so, others looked like they were uneducated. Uh, then they weren't as uneducated as they expected. For example, there's one, Kawaji. He was apparently unlettered, informed by the inspiration of the Mother Book. Um, he had not frequented any teacher and had read nothing. But when he opened the portal of speech, fine and eloquent Arabic words came out, which even the learned ulama, and the knowledgeable ones of the world had difficulty understanding. Eventually, Shams found his own spiritual guide amongst the numerous saints of Tabriz. His name is Abu Bakr Salabuth, and was known to spend much of his time amongst the dispossessed, probably indicating the young urban poor. His followers were known for not respecting government authorities, um, often exaggerating how this man was far more important than they were in their presence. We are uncertain if Shams felt the same way about the local Tabriz government officials, but he certainly viewed himself as being different from the rest of society. We must remember Shams did not reveal a certain disdain for authority figures. We must reveal that he did reveal a disdain for authority figures like that of his father. Okay, so what happens is that so now he has a teacher. Yet Shams continued his journey, um, continued trying to find other teachers. So I want to say more about Salabrov, who he said was always honest and always meant what he said. He liked this fact. One very pronounced characteristic of Shams was that he detested hypocrites, and yet he found hypocrisy everywhere, especially amongst many of the so-called spiritual teachers. As a result, he tended to gravitate towards those who we believed were very honest, even if he did not initially agree with them. Shams hated how people tried so hard to fit in with society to the point of denying who they really were. He asserts at one point, if you live without hypocrisy for an instant, Muslims will no longer greet you with salam. From the beginning to the end, I tried to practice truthfulness without hypocrisy with the followers of the path. From Tabriz, Sham's journey throughout the Seljuk Sultanate, proceeding to Baghdad, and then he went to Aleppo, Damascus, Erzurum, Aksaray, Sivas, Kayseri, Isfahan. During his travels, Shams tried to keep his identity as secret as possible. In fact, he dressed and acted just like the merchants. Now, I got to say that merchants stayed where called Cavarantarai. That's where they stayed, and you had to pay a fee to stay there. Well, here's the thing: is that the those who are Sufi mystics would stay for free at a dervish lodge. Are you guys following this? So he could, because he's a mystic, stay at a dervish lodge. He did not want to do that. He'd rather be with the merchants and traders and incognito than be with the Sufi mystics. And so as a result of that, of course, you have to pay. So that means he had to get a lot of odd jobs to be able to pay for when he goes from place to place. So he had to be flexible. When it came to his work, of course, as I mentioned before, he tried to he tried to get manual labor, didn't work, so he became a tutor of the Quran, and he had this program where kids could go through the entire Quran in 3 months, and then they gave them enough money to travel off to the next place. So he's still going through various teachers, and he found some pretty insulting, and he had arguments with them. One guy argument went as follows: there's a certain Assad, and he doesn't like Assad. He commented, and there's a verse that went as follows: and he is with you wherever you are. That was what Assad said. And despite his learning, he'd get all out of sorts when I would ask him something in public. I asked, when you say he is with you, in what way is God with you? He said, you picksqueak. What do you mean by asking this question? And he was in forbearance, and so was his anger, and he would explode. And I replied, you're a tongue-tied dog with a bad habit of harassing people. How do you explain the meaning of he is with you? How is God with a servant? And he said, God is indeed with a servant in knowledge. I said, knowledge is not separate from God's essence. No attribute is separate from his essence. He said, you're asking old questions. I said, what do you mean old? The question is dying of newness. This is what people calling scholasticism these days. So you get the idea. He's an arguer. He likes to argue. Shams, he did appreciate people he disagreed with, as long as he considered them good people. So he had his friend who, one teacher was, he called a pleasant little infidel. And his name is Harivi. And Harivi taught that those believing in mystical ideas like visions, revelations, miracles, and in the resurrection were commoners and simpletons, holding to ideas not becoming of educated and sophisticated folk. But you know what? They completely disagree with each other, and yet they absolutely loved each other. So it's about attitude. So agreeing to disagree, that's a good thing. That's Shams is all about that. So what happens now is obvious that Shams did not submit very well to spiritual teachers, as you can tell, being very independently minded. So what happens is now is that I want to mention that Shams he is part of the Shafi'i school of thought associated with Shiite Muslims. And Rumi is part of the Hanafi school, which is connected to the Sunni. So I just want you to know that when the two get together, that that you just can't make this up. That Shams is a Shiite Muslim of one school, and Rumi is a Sunni Muslim of another school, and they absolutely loved each other. Okay, so here we go. Shams uh, and Rumi would eventually meet. Now, Rumi, he doesn't remember the first time they met, but he doesn't mention it. But Shams does. Shams does mention, and he mentions that they met at first for a short period of time in Damascus. Okay, so for a short period of time, but um, Shams basically said that Rumi wasn't, in a sense, ready yet. Teachings were interesting, but he was still not at the point where they could get together and just really relate. But then it happened. Here we go. Shams finally set foot in Konya. Got the exact day. There's a lot of records here. On November 29th, 1244. At this point, Shams was already 60 years old. He's 60 years old. Now, the story of how they met varies. While Aflaki says that Shams and Rumi met while Shams was staying at the time at the inn of the sugar sellers, Cephislar says it was actually at the inn of the rice sellers. Okay, that's fine. They met in the inn. Okay, whether it be sugar sellers or rice sellers, I don't. Okay, there you have it. So too much in the way of details. When Shams first approached Rumi, he asked him a test question to see if he was a worthy teacher or not. Now we're going to have to go into this. So this is the trick question, and I'm going to tell you the trick question, and it's very muddled. So follow me, and it's important to understand that. The question he asked Rumi is, how is it that Bayezid did not need to follow the example of the prophet, did not say, glory to thee or worship thee? And I know what you're saying right now, or thinking, who in the world is Bayezid? Okay, Bayezid was a controversial Sufi mystic. He died around 848, although some say he died as late as 875. There's a difference there. While the Prophet Muhammad had once declared, we have not worshipped thee as befits thee to God, in contrast, Bayezid Bayezid goes into the middle of this ecstatic state of mystical union with God. So he goes into this mystical state. And what happens is he suddenly cries out, glory be to me, as he says. Well, many Muslims considered such a pronouncement as blasphemous, while Sufi mystics defended Bayezid, asserting that in the middle of such a state, the object of affection, of one's love, often becomes confused with the subject worshiping them, not knowing where one ends or the other begins. So in essence, God is in him, and so God is speaking through him. By the way, this is kind of interesting because this is what an accusation that was made towards the Montanists, Christian Montanists, who thrived during the 2nd and 3rd century CE in the area of Konya, where they spoke through the Holy Spirit as God in the first person. And there was a controversy over that. Just throwing that one in for fun, right? Okay, so now what happened is he made this declaration. Later, in 922, one person who followed him, his name is Halaj, a Sufi mystic, was executed for saying, I am truth, the same way that Bayezid did, in the middle of his mystical revelations. While condemning him, they also condemned Bayezid living in the century before him for creating such a precedent. So there you have it. So Shams, he believes that in the ecstatic union of God, that you should be even more clear on the difference between subject and object. And he believed that you would not say something that God would say or the spirit moving through you in the first person. Got it? So he is asking, got it? He's asking Rumi, so what do you think? Do you think it's you can speak of God in a mystical sense, speak as God in the first person, or is it always it should be in the third person, making a very big difference between subject and object? Okay, so uh, what was the answer? Because Bayezid, by the way, also Shams found Bayezid very arrogant in many different ways. Bayezid said he did not eat melons because there's no precedent for Muhammad to eat melons. So if Muhammad didn't eat melons, and I'm not going to eat melons. And yet at the same time, in some cases, he seemed to talk of himself as not only the equal Muhammad, but superior to, at least in his own opinion. So Rumi, how did he respond? Well, many Sufi scholars and Sufis in general believe that Rumi actually liked Bayezid. What? I know, you thought, hey, they're going to love each other because they're both going to go, oh, we hate Bayezid, Okay. But Rumi, um, he saw the implications of the problem. And he said, at the awareness the awesomeness of that question, it seemed that the seven heavens split apart from one another and fell to the earth, and a great fire rose within me and engulfed my skull, and I saw smoke rising up to the throne. So what's the answer? Rumi believed that Bayezid had lost all control of himself as he attempted to mystically ascend, letting himself get confused, but he did not condemn him because we all get confused. And that God is still moving through him. It's not a straight answer. And Sean's going, oh, we disagree. There's a problem here. What happened is Rumi opened it up and says, why don't we transcend this question? Move beyond this conversation between, is you like this guy or not. I think the conversation is simply, how does God operate? How does God move through nature? And according to the story, Aflaki says Shams shouted out and fell down. His Holiness Mavlani or Rumi directed that he should be picked up and carried to the school of Mavlani. So what happened is Rumi didn't quite answer the question. You're kind of like, yes, no, but let's talk about this idea of the awesomeness of God and the mystical expression and how God moves through nature and boom, boom. And Rumi, through his power, supposedly, Shams fell over and had to be carried out back to his school of instruction. Shams was indeed ecstatic over his response, for while Rumi did not outline a clear disagree, he wished to pursue the deepest nuances of the question itself with his demeanor towards the topic, both kind and humble. That's the other part, is Rumi he wanted to be kind and humble. He didn't want to do any back talking. So there you have it. Shams told Rumi, Bayezid could not stand to converse with me, not for 5 days, not even for 1 day, not at all. Only one to whom my heart and affections are inclined can I stand this. He's trying to get the last word, but Rumi's just like, keep open. In every version of the story, the two instantly became intimate companions. In fact, after they met, Rumi and Shams immediately went to isolation together. spending 40 days in a remote cell discussing their common spiritual beliefs. 40 days together. Rumi's son, Sultan Balad, says the following of their meeting. He said, "The seeker is the one who finds, for the beloved became the lover." His supreme guide on the mystical path had been Shams of Tabriz. Allah consented that Shams should manifest himself to him particularly, and that it should be for him and for him alone. Nobody would have been worthy of such a vision. After such a long wait, Mavlani or Rumi, Sham's face and the secrets became as clear to him as daylight. He saw him who cannot be seen. He heard what nobody had ever heard from anyone before. He fell in love with him and was annihilated. Rumi recognized, wow, right? So this is love. This is real love. Rumi and Shams and Rumi, love. Shams, whose name means the sun, as it was seen as an envoy sent by Allah, even an image of the divine. He says, an image crosses the heart, returns to your origin. The heart flutters all around and away from the world of colors and perfumes, clamoring, wherefore the origin, while tearing apart its adornments because of love. I mean, not just love, a deep, intense love between the two of them. And they were inseparable, always together after that until something happens. For Shams, he had difficulty attempting to define his relationship with Rumi, for it did not seem to fit any conventional spiritual model. Shams states, he says, I need it to be apparent how our life together is going to be. Is it a brotherhood and a friendship, or a sheikhhood and a discipleship? I don't like this, teacher or pupil. At times, Rumi acted as though he were the pupil. And Shams notes, in my presence, as he listens to me, he considers himself, I am ashamed to even say, like a 2-year-old child or like a new convert to Islam who knows nothing about it. Amazing submissiveness. At other times, Shams viewed Rumi as a potential teacher, but there were certain problems with this model too, as he notes. He says, since leaving my hometown, I have not seen a single sheikh. Mavlani, that's Rumi, is a fitting sheikh, if he would agree, but he doesn't give out ceremonial cloaks. If they come up to him and oblige him, saying, give me a cloak, shave off my hair, he does so under duress. This is quite different from someone who says, come be my disciple. But ultimately, Shams knew it was a relationship of equals, saying, I first came to Mavlani with the understanding that I would not be his sheikh. God has not yet brought into being on earth one who could be Mavlani's sheikh. He would not be mortal, but nor am I one to be a disciple. It's no longer me. Now I come for friendship relief. It must be such that I do not need to dissimulate. Most of the prophets have dissimilated. Dissimulation is expressing something contrary to what is in your heart. So, according to the writer Cephalosar, Rumi and Shams, there it is, spent up to 16 months together, constantly in each other's company, to the exclusion of Rumi's other disciples. Only a few gained access to them, like Rumi's son, Salah al-Din. During this time, Shams encouraged Rumi to focus more on mysticism rather than book knowledge. When Rumi kept referring to his books, Shams would say, you want to discover through learning, but it requires knowing and doing. Shams told Rumi to focus on mystical gnosis, God wherein all knowledge derives and which transcends all information found in books. Shams states, whatever the problem the people of this quarter pose, Find me with a ready answer for every one of these difficulties. My words provide answers upon compelling answers. But the problem is that while Shams uh, offered great arguments, the problem is that he talked above the heads of the people, while Rumi was able to speak in a way that the people understood. Rumi, he said, was innocent. But anyway, all these things. By the way, speaking of innocence, there's one little story I want to mention. And that is Shams carried around with him. Not Shams, I mean, Rumi carried around with him his dad's book. He loved his dad's writings. I love his dad's writings too. I think we all do. And he used his dad's writings for inspiration. So Shams told him, "We stop constantly reading your dad's works." And Rumi promised. So listen to this story. So Rumi is falling asleep and he's having a dream. And in his dream, he's dreaming of his dad's book and opening his dad's book to a certain page. Shams wakes him up and says, "I told you not to read your dad's book." So I wasn't. "No, I was there. I saw you. In your dream, you're reading your dad's book. Stop reading." Okay. So naturally, though, unfortunately, here we go. Here's the drama. People started getting jealous. Rumi's students started to plot against Shams. That's right. Oh, yeah, they're jealous. They declared that he was doing black magic against Rumi to turn him away from his life. In fact, they forced Shams to flee to Damascus. You know what I would do with students like that? It's called get different students. But anyway, heartbroken, Rumi searched for his friend and eventually brought him back to Konya. Shams returned because out of all those he encountered, only Rumi was to him a model for a sheikh, saying that he possessed this quality. Then he added, "It was on account of this quality that I returned from Aleppo to be in his company. Whereas suppose they told me, your father has risen from the grave and desired to see you and has come to tell Bashir," which is near Aleppo, uh, "come and see him before he dies again," I would have said, "Tell him, die, what can I do?" And I wouldn't have left Aleppo. But I came to Konya for that quality in Rumi. And when he came back, they made a decision. Let's make Shams part of the family. So Shams married a girl within Rumi's household. Her name is Kamia, making him part of the family. But unfortunately, she died soon after. We don't know. According to one story, she during the cold of winter, she decided she wanted to go out for a walk about the garden. Shams says, "Don't go out for a walk. You'll catch yourself to death in the cold." And of course, she caught the cold and she died. There were some differences between Rumi and Shams. For instance, there's a reference to the stripes of asceticism. We know for a fact that Shams mortified his flesh while locked in a dingy room at a caravanserai for the sugar merchants. Apparently, Shams' form of asceticism was hard to beat. Shams also felt that Rumi's kindness was both a virtue and a vice. Say Mavlani has a drunkenness in kindness, but no soberness in kindness. But I have both drunkenness and kindness and soberness and kindness. I am not subject to forgetting in my drunkenness. And so there you have it. Anyway, Shams provides one example. So this Mavlani had said many times that he is more compassionate than me. He is truly drunk. If a person falls in dark water or in fire or in hell, he, Rumi, sits watching him with chin in hand. He neither jumps in the water nor into the fire after this person, but just watches. I watch too, grab him by the tail, saying, "Oh, brother, you two are falling in. Come out here with us. Look on us with us." It is such talk that pulls them out by the tail. So while they're both, in a sense, content, not content, you see these things happening. Shams is making sure that Rumi doesn't fall in. with the other person. Okay, so now it gets interesting. So what happens is that the two of them see themselves as the sun and the moon. Okay, so Rumi and Shams came up with a metaphor describing the mystical communicative abilities. For Shams was the sun. So Shams was the sun that shined upon Rumi, who was the moon. And through the light of the moon, the common people could discern the light of mystical knowledge without being blinded. So the idea is that the light of God shines so brightly in Shams that it would blind people. But Ruby is the moon who reflects that light, and then they can understand that light because it's more visible, right? So there you have it. Okay, so but Shams asserted that Rumi naturally had two levels of discourse. He had a surface one intended for the general public, and a deeper one that was profound and at the level of the prophets themselves. So he talks about that. Yet after initial celebrations, Rumi's disciples again became jealous and treated Shams unfairly. And so after the short period of time, Rumi lost him again. And there were rumors that Shams could have been murdered. So so Shams, what happened is that Rumi's son, Sultan Valad, mentioned that Shams threatened to leave him again, but Aflaki not only indicated Shams was murdered, but that it was Rumi's jealous son by the name of Ala al-Din who murdered him in that year. Aflaki adds that Rumi disowned his son after that and refused to go to his funeral. The surviving writings of Rumi himself do indicate that he had some difficulty with Ala al-Din, that he turned to God. At one point, Shams said that Ala al-Din has much to learn from him, and this was not said in a positive manner. Rumors also spread that Shams is going to replace Ala al-Din as his successor. Remember, Ala al-Din is the oldest son. Then there's a gap in the information. And next we find Rumi asking his Ala al-Din to return home to his family, assuring him that he still loves him and telling him his actions of making himself far away from them were hurtful. Rumi also says he talked to two government officials about him in order to clear him of some accusation. So there are clues. And yet some people say that he lived and that people are having Shams sightings, much like Elvis, right? So as a result of this dramatic loss of his friend, the grief-stricken Rumi is a big moment. There it is. He's upset. Oh, there it is. We're going to go a little over time, not much. Well, I want to make sure that we're getting to the big thing. No, there's two things I want to make sure we get through. As a result of this dramatic loss of his friend, the grief-stricken Rumi instituted the spiritual concert known as the Sema, which represented for him not only a religious ceremony, but also a spontaneous manifestation of emotions. To Rumi, Shams, who had personified for the philosopher the symbolic image of the divine essence, became the true and pure reflection of Allah's love. In death, Shams transcended his nature, becoming Rumi's spiritual guide, leading Rumi towards perfection and mystical transformation from within his soul. The two could join as one within their shared spiritual state. So, Shams is on the other side, but there is this connection between the two. Because of this identification, Rumi discovered his close friend within himself. He says, although we are far from him in the flesh, without body or soul, we are both one and the same light. You can see him if you so desire, or you can see me. I am him. He is me. Rumi believed the veil which separated his beloved Shams, the perfected saint, and the son of religion, from himself was merely an illusion. He says, indeed, Shams al-Din of Tabriz is but a pretext. It is I who displays the beauty of Allah's definiteness, I. But the resulting Sema, which is the main dance of the whirling dervishes, is in essence a dance representing the movement from life to death, from mortality to immortality, from charms to union with the deity. And so this ceremony, which is still practiced, right? This is the big one. You know, the whirling dervishes, right? I'm telling you where it came from right now. And now you understand it's a relational idea. Death and mourning over the loss of Shams is displayed within the Shema that in many ways it's not unlike the lamentations of Addis on the main day of the goddess Kibali cult. Both public displays of mourning represent a progression from the mundane to possession by the deity through ecstatic dance. For the goddess celebrant, one literally became Addis in order to be filled with divine drunkenness, even to the point of self-castration. While the dervish emulated Shams through his image, experiencing intoxication and possession by Allah. Curiously, both customs emerged precisely within the same geographical context, Central Asia Minor. Now, in the Sema or the Shema, the dervish wears a white tanur. This represents a burial shroud under a hurka. A hurka is a heavy black garment symbolizing the tomb, with the tombstone reflected in his conical brown hat called a sikh. Okay, so basically you have the dervish is wearing a white tinner. This is the burial shroud. Over it is a black garment, a hurka, which symbolizes the tomb, right? And you know they take off the hurka to show the white, right? And while the hat represents the tombstone. Following a prayer, and you remember to look at those commercials again with the early dervishes going, hey, look, it's a tombstone on their head. Right along. Following a prayer and the reading of a surah, or a chapter from the Quran, the flute, which is the ney, begins to play as the dancers divide themselves into two half circles, representing the arc of descent when the soul falls into the material world, and the other circle represents the arc of ascent when the soul awakens, receives divine illumination, and proceeds back to its origins in Allah. Wow. I mean, this is the journey of the soul. It has Gnosticism in it. It has Platonism in it, right? After giving proper recognition to the sheikh, which is the leader of the dancing troupe, bowing and kissing his hand, the dervishes then shed their hurkas in an action intended to recollect in the minds of the participant and the spectator alike the exodus of the soul from the confines of the tomb or the body or of the material world. So the hurka represents the tomb, it also represents the body, and it represents the material world. So you shed that, and now the white is the white burial shroud is being seen, right? This, of course, represents the soul, right? The soul that's moving up, turning now slowly at first. The dervishes lift their right arm above their heads as an open expression of their desire to accept Allah's blessing and grace, and the left hand down towards the earth, meant to pass this divine energy to others. Gradually, the tempo of the music becomes quicker as the dervish spins faster and faster in a dance meant to display the workings of universal law. By the fourth turn, the sheikh then enters the circle, representing both the sun and its rays in the middle of a heavenly chorus of planets. This is beautiful. This is the quintessential moment when he enters into the circle. This is the quintessential moment of ecstatic union with Allah, the climax of the entire ceremony. Wow. Ancient Greek philosophical notions of the journey of the soul are not difficult to detect within this very overt symbolism. The spirit-body dualism on a cosmic level is both within Platonism and Gnosticism. Concerning the Sama dance, Rumi states, for them it is the Sama of this world and the other, even more for the circle of dancers within the Sama who turn and have in their midst their own Kaaba. Well, the special holiness, now we're going to talk about something even more, the other exciting thing. This is really exciting, and then we'll get to his the very special holiness associated with the flute in the ceremony is important to keep in mind. So the flute music, many of you who go and are interested in Sufism love the flute music, and the Rumi, the Mawlani music is absolutely beautiful. And I've been to Rumi's tomb where they had this music being played in Konya. Anyway, here it goes. So let's tell you a story. I want you to listen to this story because you're about to be dumbfounded. I'm going to tell you a story, and here we go. There's a story that Rumi told, a tale of the reed flute. The story of the reed flute. This is his perspective. He said the prophet told his son-in-law, Ali, mysteries that he had forbidden him to repeat. So he told mysteries to Ali that he was forbidden to repeat. For 40 days, Ali tried to contain himself. Then, as he could not stand it anymore, he went to the country, plunged his head into the mouth of a well, and started to relate all these secrets. During his mystic drunkenness, his saliva dropped into the well. A few days later, a reed started to grow in it. It grew quickly day after day. A shepherd cut this reed, made a few holes in it, and started to play it while keeping his sheep. His playing became famous. Thousands came to hear him and cry with joy at the sound of his music. Even camels made a circle around him. The story spread quickly, and it came to the prophet's ears, who asked that the shepherd be brought to him. After a few preludes, everyone fell into ecstasy. And he says, these melodies are the commentaries of the mysteries I told Ali. Thus, if someone among the seekers of purity is devoid of purity, he cannot hear the mysteries contained in the melody of the flute, nor can he enjoy it, because faith is pleasure and passion. So you're thinking, okay, that's a great story. So you got, he tells you, Rumi says that, Muhammad told Ali these divine secrets. He couldn't hold any longer. He sent him to a well. He got connected to reeds, and that reed became a flute, and that flute had a mystical expression. That's great. Okay, so what? In the same area where the story came up in the Rumi context of Islam, there's another story. It's a tale arriving from nearby Gordian and Phrygia. Apollo, the god of prophecy, is featured as initiating the action rather than the prophet Muhammad. Apollo curses the famous King Midas, whose touch turned all things to gold, hence the phrase, the Midas touch. And he gave him ass's ears, since the king chose Marsyas, a mere satire, over the god in musical contest. Much like Ali, Midas's barber was privy to the king's confidence. He was told, he realized he had ass's ears, but he was told that he could not tell his secret no matter what. He couldn't keep it. Unable to contain himself any longer, the barber ran, hey, guess where? Into the countryside. Hey, look, he found a hole in the ground and ever so carefully whispered his secret, hoping that at least the earth could hold such a mystery. But he was not so lucky, since the reeds growing from the hole nearby betrayed him, and every time the winds blew through the grass, it murmured, King Midas has ass's ears. Oh, yeah, there's a connection there. Rumi at this point relates that a shepherd came along, cut the reeds containing Muhammad's secret via Ali's saliva, and formed them into a flute, which divulged the divine mysteries, igniting the state of ecstasy in all who heard it and who were pure of heart. This reference is remarkably similar to the legend circulating concerning Dionysus and Orpheus, whose frenzied worship, often accompanied by music, was associated with Attis and hence Ghibli through, yet again, Central Asia Minor. Dionysus was the god of wine and intoxication, ignited mania or madness and ecstasy, interpreted as divine possession within its followers. Dionysus Orpheus was directly connected with the mysterious realm of the dead, with his worship centered upon ecstatic spinning dances. What? Spinning dances. Yes, spinning dances. Ritualized to a certain extent, the origins of this ecstatic cult has been traced by scholars to either Phrygia, Libya, or the general area by the Hittites. What a spinning dance that's done to what? The flute. And also goes faster and faster and faster and results in reunion with, of course, Attis, and then, of course, the Ghibli cult and other things. This is fascinating, right? Well, yeah, right. So thus Rumi's story bears uncanny resemblance. Now, the famous dervish Sema began spontaneously. We know this. How it started was a result of an emotional response to the joy of God. In fact, tradition explains that the Sema was done walking on the streets. Accordingly, on their way home from Friday prayer, the dervishes played the flute and the drum to express their joy. As Aflaki states, we are told that one day the master was passing in front of the shop of Salah al-Azim Sarduk, the gilder. The rhythm of the beaters reached his ears and he started to whirl. The sheik signaled the workers not to stop beating. The dance took place from the middle of the morning until the afternoon prayer. Wow. Oh, here we go. So Rumi often would say, there are many roads which lead to Allah. I have chosen the one of dance and music. Furthermore, he declared, each secret is hidden in the rhythms of music. Should I reveal it? It would upset the world. As reported by Aflaki, even women participated in this ecstatic movement in the early days, including Sharaf Khatun, the daughter of Sultan Walid, and Arifa Hoshlaiki, a prominent woman of Konya, both of whom had several disciples under them, including men. What? You got Sufi women who have disciples following them, including men. This is the 1200s, for heaven's sakes. This is a big deal. And they're all part of Rumi's movement. Wow. Of course, women oftentimes played a large role in religion in central Anatolia. Of course, I can bring up the Ghibli cult, women were the center of that, but there was a Christian movement known as Montanism, and it was largely women who were in charge of this ecstatic belief system, where they also moved to music, they moved to the flute, and they did ecstatic dancing down the streets, and were criticized by many Christians, other Christians, because of their painted faces, makeup. Female leadership was not unusual. Even the three Cappadocians, there really is a fourth Cappadocian by the name of Macrina. So by the way, the three Cappadocians also influenced Rumi. These three Christian Cappadocians, who are in the 4th century, especially Gregory of Nyssa. Gregory compares the souls striving to gain vision of God, with Moses ascending Mount Sinai, Moses thus representing the soul. And in the same way, Rumi also identifies Moses as the soul reaching the heights of divine contemplation, declaring Moses the soul should know that once he enters the most holy, everything is sheer beauty and loveliness. Both Gregory and Rumi also employ the analogy of lifting the veil in the bridal sense, revealing the ultimate love of God. There's actually even more. One quick thing. As for the contemplative life, no other Sufi group conforms more with Christian monastic structures than Rumi's Tarak Melwani, and the form it takes bears an uncanny resemblance to Basil's monastic system, one of the three Cappadocians, and the form most popular, S, in central Anatolia, the very region where Rumi created his own ascetic and contemplative monastery. The comparisons, there's even more comparisons. It's ridiculous. There is a direct connection. So Rumi encompasses all these traditions. All right. Well, Rumi and his followers were always very tolerant of different religions, to the point where many Christians and Jews believed he was really advocating their belief system. For Christians, Rumi was their Jesus, and for Jews, he became their Moses, according to the writings of that time. Rumi's toleration and acceptance of other religions reached a point where he declared, here we go, there are many ways to search, but the object of the search is always the same. Don't you see? The roads to Mecca are all different. One coming from Byzantium, the other from Syria, others running through land or sea. The roads are diverse, the goal one. When people arrive there, all quarrels, disputes, or differences that occurred on the road are resolved. Those who are saying to each other on the road, you are wrong and you are infidel, forget their differences when they arrive because their hearts are in unison. You have to remember that along these trade routes, people are not only going to Mecca, they're also on pilgrimage, Jews and Christians, to Jerusalem. Before and after meeting Shams, Rumi believed in the evolution of the spirit, literally moving from the physical into the metaphysical world. And so proceeding from minerals, plants, animals, humans, and spirits. Okay, we just went somewhere. I'm going to go there just for a second, and then we'll have the funeral. Right. He says, I died to the mineral, joined the realm of plants. I died to the vegetable, joined the animals. I died to the animal and became man. So why fear? When has dying made me less? In turn again, I'll die from human form, only to sprout an angel's head and wings, and then from an angel form I will ebb away, for all things perish, but for the face of God. It almost sounds a little bit like reincarnation through everything. And once I'm sacrificed from angel form, I'm what imagination can't contain. So let me be notness like an organ sings to me, barely return to him. Know that death, the communities agreed, is like the font of life and darkness hid. So he says that after the angelic form, who knows what is going to happen to me? He says also, it is the power of spiritual love. That's important. He says, it's the waves of love that makes the heavens turn. Without that love, the universe would freeze. No mineral absorbed by vegetable, no growing thing consumed by animal, no sacrifice of anima who inspired Mary with his pregnant breath, like ice, all of them unmoved, frozen, stiff, no vibrant molecules and swarm of motion, lovers of perfection. Every atom turns sapling like a face the sun and grow their haste to shed their fleshly form, for soul sings out out praises for God. In order to transform into spirit, you must die to yourself before you physically die, so that the light of God can fully enter you without your own carnal self to block the way. He says, in the presence, there is no room for two egos. You say ego, and he says ego. Either you die in his presence, or he will die in your presence, so that no duality will remain. Yet it is impossible that he should die either in the universe or in the mind, for he is living who does not die. He has grace in such measure that were it possible, he would die for you to remove the duality. But since his death is impossible, you die so that he may become manifest in you and that duality be lifted. So what happens? Okay, so he did enjoy a interesting marital life. At one point, I will say that um, you're going to have uh, uh, his wife would say, and she was thinking that, and then of course the story goes is that suddenly he appeared and love was made. Okay, well, Rumi dies. Here we go. Rumi dies on December 17th, 1273. Realizing beforehand he would soon die, Rumi called the inevitable moment the night of union. Following his death, his son, Sultan Walid, eventually became head of his order, and taking great measures to record, apply, and formalize and even popularize Rumi's teachings. Rumi's funeral was a grand and solemn occasion for all religious communities in Konya, with Christians, Jews, Greeks, Arabs, and Turks parading in front of the day-long funeral procession, each holding their holy book, Psalms, the Pentateuch, and the Gospels. In fact, some of those groups mourning his passing were neither Christian nor Jews, right? But the remnant of ancient pagan communities still thriving in the region accordingly. One Greek priest proclaimed during the funeral, Mavlani is like bread, which is indispensable to all. Has anyone seen a hungry man run from bread? And you, how do you know who he was? In response to the priest's words, local Muslim authorities were speechless. It was not difficult for Christians and Jews to believe Rumi numbered as one of their own. According to local accounts, the tomb beside Rumi's own was the final resting place of one of his closest and dearest Christian friends who made his final request to be buried with them. While the Armenian community claimed that it was a certain Eusebius, a prominent bishop, who was there. There are others, Muslims, who say that he converted over. But here at the same time, still, you have this concept of everybody's out there, Christians, Jews, pagans, Muslims, all claiming Rumi. Well, ultimately, in conclusion, Rumi found God not in religions, but in his special brand of mysticism. He declared, I searched for God amongst the Christians and on the cross, and therein I found him not. I went into the ancient temples of images. No trace of him was there. I entered the mountain cave of Hira, and then went as far as Kunbar, but God I found not. With set purpose, I fared to the summit of Mount Caucasus, and found there only Ankas' habitation. Then I directed my search to the Kaaba, the resort of old and young. God was not even there. Turning to philosophy, I inquired about him from Ibn Sina, but found him not within his range. I fared then to the scene of the prophet's experience of a great divine manifestation, only a 2 bows' lengths distance from him, but God was not there even in that exalted court. Finally, I looked into my heart, and there I saw him. He was nowhere else. Thank you so much. I hope you enjoyed this talk. That's Rumi for you. All right. You guys, any questions? You feel like you understand him? You're welcome. Right. So, you have received, thank you so much, Michelle. Yeah, you have received information, I thought, directly from them. I thought that was the best. You know, so, hear all these people talking about Rumi, and I thought, you know what? Let's have Rumi talk about Rumi. Let's have his best friend Chams talk about Rumi and their relationship. And you know what? Let's let the sun talk about Rumi. And I think now you have a better view and a perspective that Rumi would have wanted. Sometimes they get tired of secondary sources, and it's nice to hear nothing but primary sources. Mm-hmm. And I think you have a real understanding of what Rumi's about and his context and his times and his feelings. And I do find the relationship between Rumi and Shams very interesting, very outside the box in so many different levels. But it is the inspiration for the dance. Now that when you see the dance of the whirling dervishes and as they're going around, now you understand what it means, right? In a deep way, in a heartfelt way. It's a beautiful ceremony. It really is. I love the whole celestial aspect where you have, the leader going out, he's like the sun, and there are the planets surrounding. And at that moment, whew, there you have it. The whirling dervishes are those, specifically the ones I'm talking about, are those affiliated as followers of Rumi, of Mevlani. And these are the ones who practice this dance that was initially done in a moment, a heartbeat. They're on the streets, right? They started, they're walking down the streets, they're excited, and they're playing the drum beat, and they're playing the flute, by the way, which is the kind of music, the pagan music of Central Anatolia. They're dancing around and they start whirling. And I think that's the beginning of the inspiration. And then, of course, it became formalized into this mystical dance of these whirling dervishes. So dervishes, of course, are mystics, and of course are connected to, in this case, the music and the dance, but also other things besides. Is this helpful? So that's the whirling dervishes. As there are other dervishes that dance around too. So I mean, they're not the only whirling dervishes. But the ones in Turkey are the ones connected to Rumi. Yeah. So, and that's the ones you see on all the commercials on TV. When you see them going like this, around. That's connected to Rumi.
Okay, I have a picture of whirling dervishes, if that would be helpful.
Yeah, please.
Okay.
There we go.
Oh, where'd it go?
No, we saw it.
Okay, there it is.
There we are.
Yeah.
And so that represents the soul. And then they go around. And of course, that's the celestial sphere. Isn't that cool? Yeah. And of course, the hat represents the tombstone. They wear the green and they wear the red.
Yeah. So yeah. Anyway, so that's whirling dervishes.
Yeah. Does that help? Yeah. And it's fun to watch. Now it's pretty I've been to Turkey many times, but I had a chance to go to Konya, and they had the performance there. For a while there, it was not allowed. When the secularization of it, except not, it was allowed, but only within a certain context. Ataturk, said, we really don't want to. But as time went on, they did the performances more, and in the Konya, they did the performance. But it's so cool because I would walk into the hall where Rumi was buried. It's this huge hall. They're playing the nine. They're playing the flute, and obviously they're dancing. The flute music is just moving through the echoing halls all around you. because the acoustics are amazing in this building that's built by the Seljuks. By the way, who built this were not just the Seljuks, but I mean, it was a combination between the whole community. They wanted this. So the pagans, Christians, Jews, as well as Muslims contributed to creating this beautiful, very green building. And I recommend going there. But it's kind of a mystical experience, even going there, standing at his tomb. It's like, wow, there's where he is, right? I mean, he started quite a bit. I love his ideas of just openness and love. And yeah, sorry. Any questions? Sorry. Any other questions? Any other questions? I know I covered a lot, didn't I? Thank you, Amber, for coming. Yes, thank you so much. Yeah, I think it's a lot of fun. Yeah, thank you so much. I think there's a lot of passion for this. It's pretty. I love Turkey, and I love studying all these different religious beliefs, and then to see how Rumi just kind of puts it all together. It's like, hey, I'm there. I mean, you got a little Gnosticism, you got a Platonism there, you got this little pantheism, and it's all kind of mixed together. So I'd say, when I say I'm a mystic in many ways, I would be eye to eye with the St. Francis, and I'd be an eye to eye with a Rumi in many ways. I could hang out with this guy all day. I'm not sure if I get along with Shams, however. Yeah, Shams is kind of feisty. I don't know. I mean, I'll give you an example of some of the fights he had. He was a little bit less friendly, and he didn't like authority. So figures that becomes apparent later on. And he was kind of a troublemaker. But hey, you know what? If Rumi loves him, we all love him, right? He's with the package. You get Rumi, you get Shams. So that's that. They come as a couple. So there you go. Any other questions? No. Also want to mention, isn't it pretty amazing the connection between the Midas story and the Ali story, the same location. Let's see. Wait. Okay. Sorry, I see a message here. Jack. Okay. Yes. Yes. Thank you for sharing. You'd say I've been limited to the Rumi quotes, but to learn about the man and his life brings so much more to his words. Yeah, it really makes me like him even more, because he's no longer, anybody can write sweet words or nice words that ring to the ears, but you kind of wonder who's behind the words. I think that now that we know the man behind the words, it has more force and more context, and they're more profound. I'm still loving the room analogy with where the light of God moves. All the different beliefs and religions are like little houses, right? And the light shines in within, very well put together, within each of those houses, and refracts around it's above. But ultimately, all those walls will be transcended, and it's still the same light that permeates all through them all. It's just a beautiful analogy. I mean, so one light and really unifying. All right. Well, there's no more questions. I will, or actually, Mark, you will close it up.
Okay. Yeah, I'll shut her down.
So thank you so much for coming. It's been a sheer pleasure. And I would recommend buying some books on Rumi, in his life and his history. He's a very fascinating person, and hopefully it's inspired you to go out and make a better world, as Rumi certainly did. Thank you. Have a good night.
Thank you all. See you.
Good night, everyone.
Night.
Thank you, Jim.
Good night.
Good
Good night.
night.